And all right, we are recording. And it's an honor here to talk with Dr. Eric Helms from New Zealand. I'm in Costa Rica, so you people in the U.S. we're in completely different places. So Puerto Rico. And so this is like, I guess you would say this is the second episode of Bro Radio of myself talking to Eric, and we're just gonna have a chat today about, is it possible to gain lean body mass? Is it possible to get more bigger, which is the scientific term for hypertrophy? I think Brett Schoenfeld said that in his last article.
Yep,
which is nice to see. And so, is it possible to get bigger without an extreme excess of calories? Like, so this idea of dirty bulking versus lean bulking. And so I know that you have a study coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about like those groups and what you're looking at and what your hypothesis is there?
Yeah, so this is a pretty cool study. It's Legion Athletics. You guys might have heard of Mike Matthews. That's his supplement company. They've generously funded this study. It's not at all related to their supplements. It's just them hooking us up. So yeah, it's Legion Athletics funded study that we're running in conjunction with a couple of other folks who are on the advisory board of Legion. So James Krieger is running stats. Brad Dieter is running the nutrition side of the study. And then I've also got Steve Taylor, who's now helping out. He's the Team 3DMJ RD. So I'm blinded to what's going on the nutrition side on a participant by participant basis. But I know the study design because I designed it. So I'll be the lead author on this. And we're handling the resistance training portion here at AUT. And like you said, I'm in New Zealand. 2 Americans, neither one living in the States. So yeah, what we've got going is an 8-week study. We have 3 groups, and each of the individuals in the study is going to be randomly assigned to one of the 3 groups. We have the goal of someone maintaining weight throughout the study, so eating at maintenance. We have the goal of another group being in a 5% surplus, so very slow weight gain, and another group at more aggressive, 3 times that surplus at 15% surplus. And then they're all on a 3 times per week, full body hypertrophy style program. Each time they step in the gym, they're benching and they're squatting, and they've got a circuit of accessory work afterwards. To be in the study, we're currently looking at men, although we have a female planned study that's going to replicate as well. So we're looking at men who have at least body weight and bench, body weight and a half squat, and 2 years of resistance training experience with the squat and the bench. We're looking at changes in muscle thickness in the arms and the legs, so quads, triceps primarily. We're looking at sum of 8 skin fold thickness change with a really high quality anthropometry, so not deriving a body fat percentage of that, just looking at the skin fold change, so it's really reliable. So ultrasound muscle thickness, skin fold change, and then we have 1 RMs of the squat and the bench. And yeah, we're running it for 8 weeks, and we're going to do some comparisons and then just see if there's associations as well between how much weight someone gains and the proportion of lean to fat mass. And it's slow going. Anytime you manipulate people's nutrition and their training, it's kind of a big ask for trained individuals.
Yeah,
but right now, we've finished 2 people. We have another 3 who are currently enrolled in the middle of the study. We've got a few more that are coming through. So I predict it's going to be a little ways before we finish the study. It'll probably be 2020. But I'm pretty excited about it because right now, as you know, we hang our hat on Garth 2013. And now, just literally this last month, another study was published, which we reviewed in mass, which we can talk about. But we have pretty limited data, so we kind of have to go on theory and anecdote. So I think it's important stuff.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Like this, because this question is so big for trained lifters. Because you could, if your goal is if you're trying to stay lean for the entire year, you can waste years. And I think if you look at Menno's stuff, if you look at your stuff, if you look at even what I'm thinking, which is a cluster of a lot of things, most of us are saying like, hey, once you get to stay in this window, right? So like stay in this window of 9 to 15% body fat, maybe even 17. We don't really know, but just window it out. And I think both of us we're trying to figure out who can gain where. And I think your study population will probably be a little bit less trained than our study population. I think that your study has more control. I'm not blinded. So the study that we're running is more and it's not even a study. It's like, hey, we're offering these camps. Come to these camps. We're going to offer coaching in between the camps. So there's not the same level of scientific rigor that you have. And
I think you're selling yourself short. I've seen, for the audience, I've seen the manuscript here. This is legitimate, peer-reviewed, quality published research. It's a little more on the applied, ecologically valid side, but I definitely think, I mean, honestly, there's tons of research that gets published where the lead author is not necessarily blind to the nutrition protocol or vice versa. That's a nice feather in the cap, but it's certainly not like, doesn't count, what you're doing. I think what you're doing is really important.
Yeah, my goal is to really, why I want to do this is not I want to obviously add to the field, but my hypothesis is that if your FMI, well, say your genetic, say you're 85% of your genetic potential versus 96% of your genetic potential, both those people are going to come in extremely trained in a research study. Like they're going to blow the water out of any research trained population. But 85% is a lot different than 96%. Like those are huge. We're talking probably a decade there. Yeah. And so my goal is to get kind of those two different, and maybe get those two different levels and see if, because I know that you've competed. And so over 2011 was your last, you walked on stage. Mm-hmm. And then now you're what? 7 pounds bigger than that? More bigger?
Yeah, if we look at my stage weights in 2011 versus now, I was a little heavier actually in 2009, but I think some of that was just I was so jacked up from contest prep. I was retaining some water from stress. But overall, if I was to look at body comp now, having just competed in April and being leaner now, going to get on stage again next month in July, and where I was in August 2011 on stage, I'd say like 7 pounds difference of getting on stage mass. And some of that is not necessarily I'm that much bigger. It's that I've done a better job this prep of retaining muscle mass and strength as well. So if I really had to like nail down and tell you a number, I think I've probably gained a legitimate 5 pounds of lean body mass from my peak in, let's say, the 2011 off season before I started dieting to now. So 8 years to put on 5 pounds. How do you measure that? So
and to put it into context, that study that just came out of Brazil, like their dirty bulk group put on 5.3 pounds of muscle in a month. Like
now, here's the thing though. There's and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that study by Ribeiro that just came out, we covered it in mass. They didn't actually measure changes in
it was skin folds, right?
So what they did, and this is I think really important, and no offense to the authors, but so what they did anthropometry, and then they used an equation that has been shown previously validated with DEXA to mirror changes in skeletal lean mass. Actually, so it's skeletal lean muscle mass is what they use. It's an equation. Now get this, the variables in that equation are race, height, weight, gender, and that's it.
So they didn't even use their skin fold measurements in the
exactly. And let me just make sure I have that right. Yeah, so it's skeletal muscle mass equals 0.244 times body weight plus 7.8 times height plus 6.6 times what does S stand for? Sex. And then they multiply that by age and race. So age, race, sex, height, which means that the only variable that's changing in that equation is body weight. So the more mass you gain using this equation, the more skeletal muscle mass you gain. So what we did to review this article, because again, no offense to the authors, I don't think that aspect should have been kept through peer review. I think that what they should have asked them to do is go, hey, you did skin folds. That's great. You got a body fat percentage. Let's just use whatever's left as the change in lean body mass. That would be more valid. Because the equation that they used here has been validated at the group level in very recreationally trained or untrained individuals. But the people in this study are competitive bodybuilders.
They're pretty trained. Their FMIs are like 23.5.
It's awesome. Yeah, and they're most likely, like, for all intents and purposes, drug-free, which tells us something as well. They were 3 months not taking anabolics and going into the study. And while, like, we worry about fake natties on YouTube, when someone's actually going to join a study and be tested, they don't have any incentive to lie. And someone who's been off gear for just 3 months isn't going to go on a dirty bulk. That's not going to go.
It's be pretty bad. Like that's
Yeah.
not going to go well.
Yeah, that would result in, let's see how much fat I can gain in 3 months. So
Yeah.
I'm
There's
these
one guy
guys,
that lost muscle. That's him.
exactly, legitimately, right? So what would happen? These 11 male bodybuilders who are at least 3 months clean are probably like natural bodybuilders, or and like I said, from a 23 FFMI kind of average standpoint, you've probably got some people who are close to their genetic potential. So when you back calculate this and you figure out what was the actual percentage change in fat-free mass versus lean mass, that's when you start getting some good numbers, which we reported in Mass. This is the most recent one, just came out yesterday, and I'll give you the scoop, even if you're a non-subscriber. So the high energy group, so that's the group that's eating more, they increased their fat-free mass by 3%, which is about 2.4 kgs, and they increased their fat mass by 12.4%. That's 1.8 kgs. And then the low energy group, so small surplus, they increased their fat mass by 1.5% to 1.2 kgs, and their fat by 2.5% or zero point 0.3 kgs. Statistically, I think the main thing to point out is we're looking at a really low sample size here. So I don't take these stats for too far, because I don't even think you should be running p-values with these kind of ends. But there was not a significant increase in fat mass for the low energy group. So that 0.3 kgs was a non-significant change. However, it was significant in the high energy group. And when you look at the differences between groups, you do see a significantly greater increase in fat mass in the high energy group. Now, I think what really matters, so I just threw a bunch of numbers at you and you're like, whoa, like if you're a listener, what really matters here is what's the ratio? So in the slow gain group, they were gaining lean to fat mass at a rate of 4-to-1, which is pretty freaking good. And in the fast group, they're gaining lean to fat mass at a ratio of 4-to-3. So they're at like basically a 1/3 of the advantage. Or like, if you think about it, if for every 4 units of mass, you're getting 3 units of fat, you're going to have to do a lot of mini cuts, if you want to try to control that fat mass. And then the question
they
is, well,
double the muscle though. Like
now here's another question though. So anytime you change fat mass,
you're gaining muscle with you.
There's
That's only 7% though. Like 7% of that
not
fat.
much. It's not much. So yeah, I think depending on Hall's equations, it's 13% of adipose tissue is going to come up as lean body mass. I don't know how that's going to play out with using anthro. So again, we're looking at semi-fuzzy data in a small sample size, but the data largely mirrors what we saw in Garth. It is a pretty big disproportion. Like from a percentage standpoint, 12.4% increase in fat versus a 2.5% increase in fat. So
is it worth it though? Is it worth it?
That's the question. So it's the same findings from a relative amount of fat gain. So in Garth, you also saw 5 times the fat gain in the group that was gaining quicker. If you go back and look at that. Now here's the thing. Here's the reason why I look at this study in less favorable light. Because, like you were saying, the person who's at 85% of their FFMI, they're probably going to be able to put on some muscle mass in a higher energy surplus. I would agree with that prediction, right? Because they've got more room till they get to their genetic ceiling.
Got more runway.
Exactly. Garth, they had a lot of runway. So
yeah, they're like 20.
Yeah. So these are low FFMI. They're people who the only resistance training they're doing is as a consequence of their sports conditioning.
Mostly ice hockey, right?
It was a mixture of a bunch of elite athletes. I think a lot of them were ice hockey, but there was some track and field folks. Yeah.
Kayaking, taekwondo. Yeah.
Yeah.
Soccer. Yeah. So not football.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you look at the program, it's a pretty solid intermediate program. They basically put them on like your classic strength hypertrophy 4-day split, right? But that's on top of whatever they're doing. So that means you took someone who I would describe as definitely someone who's lifted weights. Like these are elite athletes. They've been playing sport and access to S&Cs forever. And it's not like they're in a country where they don't do it at all. This is Norway. So strength conditioning is a part of their operation. So they're not untrained, but I would classify them probably as late stage novices or early stage intermediates as far as their resistance training experience, right? So if you put those folks into what amounted to probably a 700 calorie surplus, because they're eating about 600 calories more than the slow gain group, and you give them all of a sudden 4 days of training on top of what they were doing previously. 2 upper days, 2 lower days, progressively overloaded, supervised by an S&C. You would think if there was going to be a group that could benefit from being in that kind of big surplus, it would be this one.
Yeah.
That's not what happened. Like
Not at all.
the gains between groups weren't significantly different except for the fat mass, and they didn't even get stronger. There was non-significant differences between groups. If you really want to play like I'm gonna try to look at this in the best favorable light, 2 out of the 3 lifts were better in the fast gain group, but I think the squat was actually stronger in the non-significant differences didn't even consistently favor for strength the fast gain group. They were slightly better for lean body mass, but again, with the amount of fat they put on as well, that could be mostly explained by just the adipose tissue. So didn't look good.
The thing that got me on that study was they essentially had an uncontrolled concurrent training model because they weren't controlling for their sports practice.
True.
And so that was so they had 12 sets per week, and then if you look at the individual data on that study, they had guys in each group that lost muscle. So that was pretty telling to me. Like, even so, maybe they weren't actually in a surplus. Maybe maybe the kayakers weren't moving that much, and so they were the ones that were in a surplus, and then they were the guys that gained in each, because some people gained a ton. Like they had they had a couple guys that gained like 8 to 10%.
Yep.
So it was, but that's the thing. Like those are the 2 studies. So we have this 2019 study out of Brazil, which has arguably the highest trained population that's ever, not arguably, has the highest trained population that's ever looked at this. And then the thing that got me, the lowest
sample size, and then the worst. Unfortunately, like again, no shot at the people that ran the study, but probably the poorest metric of changes in lean body mass. We're looking at it, at first a skeletal muscle mass equation that shouldn't be used at all, and then even if you back calculate it, we're relying off skin fold derived percentages, which is unfortunate. And it's 4 weeks too. Even though it's a great sample, it's a small sample, and it's so yeah, you're right. We don't have the best data.
And in that Brazil study, the thing that got me like in the discussion was the dirty bulk guys, which was a dirty bulk. Like it was, they were like
a lot of calories.
I think their carbs were like 1,200. Like it was
crazy.
Gnarly. I can't imagine eating 1,200 grams of carbohydrates.
The slow gain group done a lot of. It was on like.
They were like 700.
Yeah.
They were keeping their fat super low. I was like, why is their fat at 25 grams? But that's nice that it was controlled. That variable wasn't different. But the slow gain group, just to play the devil's advocate and know that like we're 100% probably on the same page, but the slow group.
How dare you disagree with me? That's not how science works. I'm the guru. I'm right. Yeah.
The slow group had the non-responders. So they had 2 non-responders. And so that's what kind of jumped out to me is like everybody in the dirty bulk group gained, at least they gained muscle. So to me, when I see this stuff, I'm like, all right, the dirty's safe. Like if you're, I know I'm not going to waste time. So if you
agree with that. I would actually agree with that statement. And I'm now going to switch and become on your side, and we're going to both yell at Helms. And it'll be like, yeah, like if we want to know for sure that you are going to be anabolic, putting on muscle in a position where you're most likely to make gains, it's the seafood diet. You're not wrong. It's just, what's the cost? Is it worth it? And in the real world, you don't just like do something for 12 weeks and no matter what, like until week 6, you're like, man, I'm gaining a lot of fat. I'm not getting stronger. Carry on, my wayward son. 6 more weeks till the study's over. No, you might change something, So it's not like this is you're shoehorned into these 2 options. I think in the real world, you could certainly approach things leanish and then be like, that 8-week mesocycle didn't do anything. I put on 1 pound and my lifts are the same and I don't really see much of a difference in the mirror. Maybe I'll give it another 8 weeks and okay, really nothing's happening here. I need to be more aggressive. That's what happens in the real world. Or you do the opposite. You do your dreamer bulk and you're like, wow, I guess I have to do a cut now. And I just feel tired on stairs now. That didn't do anything for me. That's the one thing hilarious about Garth, by the way, is that the only significant performance difference.
They were slower.
Yeah, they got slower. Yeah, I couldn't jump as high. Yeah.
Their legs got fat. Their legs got bigger. That was the only thing on the DEXA. Their legs got bigger and they got slower because they had to carry it around. Exactly. You wouldn't be too well thought of in on the team sports if your guys got slower. That was one of my buddies was he was an S&C coach at a D1 school, and he had like 200 athletes, but he had the volleyball team, and like everything on the volleyball team is after the vertical jump. And so he was like, hey man, he's like, I got to get these girls vertical jumps higher. Like I have to, like, this is my, he was like,
my job security.
He's like, what? He's like, he's doing all his speed velocity based training. I'm like, they got to lose weight. Like just get them to have less body mass and they will jump higher.
Yes.
So it's, I think we have these two studies, and both of us, we see the weaknesses in these studies. We also appreciate we both appreciate the amount of work that went into both of these studies. Like that's one thing, like if you've done science, you even if you critique a study, you're like, this took a lot of effort. Like just watching people live, just recruiting. And so I think that we have to just keep going. We got to do we got to get better metrics. And that's a product of funding. That's a product of everything. And unfortunately, the questions that we want to answer, that we care about, they're not going to get funded. I mean, you guys, Legion Athletics is a supplement company, so they've.
Yep.
But the only real reason that you can probably run that study is because your lab has all that equipment. If you had to buy that,
Correct.
If you had to buy that equipment, this study would be unrunnable.
Correct.
So even labs that they're using equipment that's paid for by probably disease research, which is what it is.
Here at the Sports Performance Research Institute, New Zealand, it is paid for by sports research. But trust me, I'm not the guy who gets the people who are doing concussion research in rugby. They get the big money. I get the supplement company money. So it's and I'm very grateful for it. Like Renaissance Periodization helped me out. Legion Athletics, like it's awesome that we live in a time where that can happen. But the number of decimals are just slightly different compared to when you get like NIH funding or something like that.
$5 million R01. I was in a lab that got a $5 million R01. It was like, dude, it was like a train of people came in the door. It was nuts. Not bad. Like it was necessary. Like we're 5,000 person and like pilot projects. Like it was super cool. That's probably never going to happen for the questions that we want to answer. So that's one thing I love is that you're starting to see skin in the game from a lot of us. It's like, hey, if we want to answer these questions, we're probably going to have to donate our time. We're probably going to have to donate our money. We're probably going to, if we really want to see this stuff done, it's going to take, it's going to take some work. And I've seen in the last 5 years exponentially, like the amount of people that will invest in this stuff. And I think a lot of that is credit to even a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but a lot of it is credit to Aragon. Like he started this back in 2008, and now a lot of this evidence-based S&C world, and people care about it. They know that these studies aren't super great, and they want to see more. And so that's cool that people are demanding this. And so if you're listening to this and you have the opportunity to get involved in one of these studies, that's one of the things that you can do. If you are a trained person, sacrifice 8 weeks of your life, and it's probably going to be a really decent training protocol. You're going to care about it because you got bystander effect, and you're probably going to get great results. And it's going to be a little bit different than what you were doing before. So get involved, and if you can give money. I
totally agree, Ben. Like as someone who I've competed in 10 shows and a combined 20 number of weightlifting and powerlifting meets. I've been lifting for 15 years. I'm incredibly dedicated to the iron. During my master's and my PhD, and now as a research fellow here, I've probably been a subject in over 20 studies. And I find a way. Like it doesn't take that much. You get a little creative. I remember I was sitting in an office room here at AUT with cannulated in my arm, measuring my blood glucose every hour for 5 hours for morning, working off my phone because I couldn't really type with one hand for every Wednesday 3 weeks in a row while we did a reliability assessment of measuring changes in blood glucose and fasting insulin and getting a certain preload. And that was for diabetes research. Like it didn't even have anything to do with me. Did that mess up my nutrition a little bit in the morning? Yeah, my breakfast became 75 grams of glucose, but I made it work for the rest of the day. I changed my training around. I sometimes I do curls and I started bleeding out of my arm. But hey, like it's because I'm paying it forward, and honestly, it's not that hard. Like I had an isokinetic dynamometer assessment where I did this very fatiguing protocol, and I was like, all right, well that's fine. I normally do my leg extensions the next day. I will just not do leg extensions, have them do that, and that'll replace it the next day. Shift from my training schedule, and hey, I'm doing good. I'm still making progress. I'm still moving the needle forward, even if it's only taken me 5 pounds every 8 years, but nonetheless gains.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. I mean, the I think a lot of us. That's the thing. A lot of us would kill 5 pounds in a 5 year. Like, and the that's the people that once you get to this land of depreciating returns, and that's where kind of mastery sets in. Like you care about
Yeah.
these nuance. You care about these very very nuanced questions, and that's what I care about. I think that's what you care about as well. I do care. I do care about like what is the most effective way to get untrained people to a level that is going to protect them. And I
Yes.
think that level is very low. Like, and that's like kind of mining the gap. I think getting someone who has, a guy who has a 17 or 16 F of mind, getting him, where does he have to be to get to not fall down? Probably like a 20, like maybe
Yeah.
a 19. And
Start
just
with a
that's,
two. If we get you to a
yeah.
two number, then you're good. Yeah. Yeah,
And,
and that's important.
and just
Arguably, it's more
maintain that.
important than us muscle miners. Us
So much more important.
tending the crops, trying to get just a little more yield. The it's a very interesting topic too. Like, there's another thing. Like, we're talking about these handful of, well, let's put it right. The two studies that exist, and hopefully after you and I do our thing, there's surely someone else in the woodworks, maybe another three if we add ours in there. They're going to come out in the next few years, answering this question directly. But there's also a lot of other work that we can pull from to kind of get a big idea on this. So I'm fortunate to be a part of a paper that's now in review that's led by Gary Slater. So he's an Australian researcher, pretty well known in the sports nutrition world, and I'm doing that with a few others, where we basically looked at what is the role of a surplus as far as creating an anabolic stimulus. Because if you look at the debates in kind of the quote unquote evidence-based world, there's not a unanimous position on this. Like, we've been kind of playing devil's advocate with one another, but some people will say, hey, look, it's all about muscle protein synthesis. It's actually about protein balance. And other people will go, hold on, like, where's this mass going to come from? Even if we just do the math, if you're using body energy, adipose tissue to provide your fuel, and you are in a positive protein balance, you can only recomp so much. Like, if you're at 10% body fat, at what point, like, you can only gain so much before you're at essential levels of body fat. And the reality is that when you start to get lower and lower and lower in body fat, you start to have things that are going to short circuit your gains. And I think that's one position. Like, you can recomp, and then you would just have to eventually be in a surplus, but you can recomp very effectively. There's no reason mechanistically; it's all muscle protein synthesis. But I don't actually think that's true, because we have data now showing that if you're in a acute deficit, muscle protein synthesis is actually capped. So there is a ceiling effect. It doesn't get quite as high. And then more importantly, there's other research showing that lean people who are in a deficit versus overweight people who are in a deficit have a different total muscle protein balance. So a lean individual, not only is their muscle protein synthesis capped, just like has been shown out of Stu Phillips' lab that an overweight person would, but they also have higher levels of muscle protein breakdown the leaner you get. And this is something that's mirrored in all my anecdotal experiences. You can take a natural bodybuilder, we'll say a female who's around the high 20s or a male who's in the teens, and you can diet them down till they're about, say, 5% over stage weight. We're talking about, you look really good. You could be a cover model on a magazine, but you still have another, maybe depending on your height, 4 to 8 pounds to lose before you've got crazy conditioning. That's where you tend to see losses in fullness and muscle size and the appearance of muscle. That's where it gets really difficult. And I think that's where you start to get issues of energy availability, concurrent training from the cardio you may or may not have to do, and just that increase in muscle protein breakdown from a mechanistic side of it. We see drops in circulating levels of testosterone. And yeah, sure, within the normal physiological range, that's probably negligible. But when you go from, say, one case study in Rossau 2013, the guy goes from 1,000 to 300 or 250. Like that's 1/4 of your normal production. That has to have some kind of impact on whether your ability to gain, and not to mention there's effects on sleep. So there's all these things that are happening, and obviously
Thyroid.
this is yeah. Now these are obviously dieting conditions, but I would think that someone who is trying to stay too lean is going to have kind of a lightweight version of all of that. So there's a lot of different pathways of someone being too lean, and that would potentially short circuit progress, and that go away as soon as you're in a significant surplus. So I think the question is not, do you need to be in a surplus or not? It's really, what's the size of the surplus? I think if you have a substantial amount of body fat, yes, you can absolutely put on muscle. And we've seen it time and time again. Like every single study that's out there, when you take untrained or recreationally trained individuals and you don't modify their nutrition and you just have them weight train and they just let their natural ad libitum intake of food happen, most people gain muscle mass, almost everyone gains strength, and you typically see a drop in body fat or a maintenance of body fat percentage and an increase in lean mass. So you don't have to enforce a surplus when you're untrained or recreationally trained. But I do think at a certain stage, if you're an intermediate or higher, it's not a question of should I have a surplus, but it's a question of, all right, well, if I'm not high in body fat, how large should the surplus be? I think that if we're honest and we look at all the data together, which is what the kind of the argument we present in the review paper that will come out soon, I do think it's a question of how big the surplus is, not whether it should be there or not.
So the MPS response is going to be blunted in someone who's lean. Lean would be, and percentages I don't think really matter to any of us. Like percentages they just inherently have error. So
Yeah.
like what would you? So you're saying like a guy probably under 9%, the odds that you can even gain anyways are going to be low.
Yeah, so basically it's what we know, because I don't want to overstate it. What we know is if we ask the question, is a surplus necessary? Well, we can say that you can still elevate muscle protein synthesis from eating enough protein, even though you're not in a surplus, and resistance training. And if you are in a overweight category, I'll just use BMI. So if you're over 25 BMI, we've seen that all that does is just lower the top end muscle protein synthesis response to protein and exercise, right? However, if we're talking about a lean individual, and I think that could probably be categorized by 9%, like you said, in the male, or perhaps under 20% for a female, and that's speculative because I don't have the specific data on that. Not only will muscle protein synthesis be blunted similarly to the way it is in someone who is overweight, but you will also have higher levels of muscle protein breakdown. You're probably wondering, oh, why am I catabolic? Well, don't think of it that way. Think of it like this. If you have low levels of body stores of fat, you're going to be relying more on glycogen and also on utilizing amino acids for energy. So you're going to see more conversion in the liver from carbohydrate and fat into other substrates. From protein into either carbohydrate and fat into other substrates. So, your ketogenic amino acids and your glucogenic amino acids, more of them are going to become fuel. And that could potentially be leaving you less to build muscle or protect against muscle loss. And in general, there's other data too. Like there was a study done in the 70s where they put people on 3 days of total fasting. So 3 days don't eat anything. Might have been 6 days. I can't remember. And they had men in the obese category and then men in the lean category. And I don't remember what the body fat percentages were, but they were specifically lean, not just normal weight. And you saw a 4-fold increase in leucine metabolism and in rates of gluconeogenesis, all between 2 to 4-fold. Basically, all the markers for using more protein for fuel in the lean individuals, but not in the fat individuals. And the individuals with obesity. And that was, I think, a study in the 90s. And then one in the 70s looked at their testosterone markers and saw that obese men maintained testosterone levels while being fasted for 6 days, while lean men, it started to decline quite quickly. So yes, we know that a surplus prevents those things from happening. So if you are at maintenance, you could expect something between the two. Because really what maintenance is in the real world is you kind of being in an energy flux. and the net balance is that you're not losing tissue and not gaining tissue. So would you have maybe slightly compromised testosterone levels and be using more protein for fuel and having slightly higher muscle protein breakdown and capped muscle protein synthesis not being in a surplus if you're trying to stay Instagram worthy all the time? Probably. And do I think that would prevent you from gaining muscle if you're a novice? No. Novices grow no matter what. But at a certain stage, it's going to at least slow things down, if not put the brakes on it. So I do think. Now, but here's the rub, though. So then I don't think it's accurate to then say, all right, well, the more and more advanced you get, the more you have to push that envelope. Because, and here's why, we have not shown, just because a surplus is required to avoid those problems, have we shown that additional surpluses counteract them. So once you're not in a deficit, once you are no longer, once you have provided enough energy, I don't see any advantage of providing even more energy. I haven't seen anything that indicates that that's beneficial. And if anything, being in a massive, massive surplus could cause problems. Insulin, even no matter how much you eat, is not going to be at the point where it's more anti-catabolic than just having a protein shake post-workout. It doesn't matter if you're slamming 1,200 grams of carbs, like we saw in the study on bodybuilders. Dietary fat, if you're at a low intake, it can potentially harm your testosterone output. But being at a super high intake makes a very marginal difference. Protein, you eat a ton of it, at a certain point, you're simply just not going to be actually increasing muscle protein synthesis or eliminating breakdown. If anything, it's going to make it harder to eat more, because it's so satiating. So there's no mechanism by which a larger than small surplus that I can think of from any macronutrient is going to be able to help you. So long as you're meeting your micronutrient needs, you're not in an energy deficit, and you are actually in a surplus, which is the real world problem, which we can talk about in a second. Do I see any benefit to being in any greater surplus? So that's kind of where I'm at. It's like, first, how do we actually know we're in a surplus? Well, are we gaining weight over time? That's the key, right? So then it's a question of how much weight should we be gaining over time? And I think, man, the difference between maximal rates of muscle mass gain and submaximal but still gaining muscle mass in a highly trained natural lifter, they might as well be the same number. If you're gaining muscle and you can actually measure that and you're an advanced lifter, you're doing almost everything right, in my opinion, or enough of it right that it doesn't matter. And trying to think about the grass being greener, like, shit, man, it's you should just be happy you can make gains. You've been lifting for 15 years. So in my opinion, I think a small surplus is probably what makes the most sense, given the data we have. But the trick is to actually ensure you are in a surplus, because like we talked about before we started the call, non-exercise activity thermogenesis ramps up, and the amount that you might need to eat to actually fuel muscle protein synthesis, because the process of generating muscles is quite metabolically expensive, might be more than you expect. So if you do the math, you think, a pound of muscle, that's just, and if I look at how much of that's actually protein, that's only like 800 calories. So I only got to eat to gain 1 pound a week. I only got to eat 100 calories a day. That's not actually true. Some of the speculative math out there would suggest it's between 2,000 to 3,000 calories more per week you have to put on a pound of muscle tissue to overcome the cost of it. And then to potentially, if your NEAT goes up, it might even be more than that. So you might have to be, I like to actually use the same figure that we estimate for body fat losses of 3,500 calories to gain or lose a pound because of that. And it's not that you're actually in a 500 calorie surplus. It's that you're only in a 100 calorie surplus. But to get to that surplus, you have to eat 500 calories more, which is kind of a confusing little brain breaking statement. But knowing that the process of putting on muscle costs energy is what you need to know.
And I think that is the most important thing for someone who's trained to figure out. I think finding that point where you eating as much as you can and you don't gain weight, that is probably the most important data point that you can find. Because then you can go somewhere. Then you can cut. Because otherwise, if what I've seen in just consulting with people is that there are so many people, because of social media or because of just because of the world that we live in, of being a coach, of seeing other people in a day-to-day life, that they want to maintain this level of lenience.
Mm.
And I live at the beach, and so that, like, if I get up, like, I've gotten as high as like 195, 197 in the morning, like I'm puffy,
Mm-hmm.
like I like right now I'm like 185, like, and so I have, and my FMI is around 25, so I have to make the decision in my life: is it worth it? I'm married, like, is it legit worth it for me to go get puffy and then have to come down? And it is, because I love it. I love this world. Like, I'm the same thing as you. Like, the iron game matters to me. But maybe, if you make a lot of money off looking a certain way,
Might not be.
it might not be worth it for you. And so
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean, what I see, it doesn't mean that you get to eat 2,600 calories a week and get 20,000 or 2,600 calories a day and have 20,000 steps. Like that's stupid, because then you get a ton of these. Then you get a ton of this, like, reduced energy availability symptoms of
Yeah.
all the stuff, which is going to be worse in females than males. Like, guys, we got more room to work with. But you should not be living at, especially if you're a guy, there's no reason for you to be living at a 25 kcal per kilogram of fat-free mass on energy availability. There's zero reason for you to be doing that.
Yeah. I tend to
And
agree. I think for a practical take-home message, what I typically tell people, and this is back calculating from Garth, and I think it goes hand in hand with the new study by Ribeiro, and what I've seen anecdotally, for natural lifters who are at a certain level where gaining comes at a slow pace, I typically recommend, on average, around a 1% gain of your body weight per month, and that you are gaining muscle mass. Like that, your scale weight goes up. You look at your rolling average every 2 weeks, and if you're not up, 0.5%, so which for a guy that's gonna be around a pound, for a gal probably half that, or close to 2/3 of it, and every month. So for example, that's not nothing. Like for me in the off season, I get up to the puffy thing for me is like 220, because I get on stage at about 180. That's 40 pounds over a shredded stage weight. I'm 6 foot, so that's not huge. Yeah.
Dude, I don't have like dick measuring pro. It's cool, man. Like, there's plenty of people bigger than me. Poor vida.
Absolutely, both of us. And so for me, that's me gaining 2 pounds per month. That doesn't seem like a lot, but man, if you just go to the grocery market and look at like 2 pounds of meat, not that I'm putting on 2 pounds of muscle mass a month, I'm probably putting on 1.5 pounds of fat. If everything goes perfectly. But me putting on 2 pounds a month, kilo a month, I basically did that for a year and a half in preparation for my show. Before that, I did a couple mini cuts in 2018 before trying to start at a good position. And I do think that's where I put on a good chunk of muscle mass. I finished my PhD. I had the time to train hard the way I wanted to, focus on bodybuilding, do accessory work, all that stuff. And that's definitely not a dirty bulk. That is looking at small changes over time. But I ensured I was in a surplus. And I ticked a lot of boxes. I made sure I was doing a lot of things lined up. And it really does add up over time. Like, if you do a year and a half of putting on a kilo a month, that's a lot of body weight. That's putting on a legitimate amount of mass. That's 18 kilos. Not that I put on that much. I went from 92 to 93 to right around 100 in a year and a half. So that's basically a pound a month is what I gained, and it really paid off. And other things I tracked is I made sure I was getting stronger. So my bench went from I got up to a peak of a 165 kg touch and go bench. So that's from around 147. So I went from like 325 to 365 bench in a year and a half, which isn't crazy, but man, that's great progress for someone at my stage. And the Wilks score is actually higher if you look at the comparison at 92 versus 98. I think is when I hit that 165.
Are we really talking about how much we're benching right now? Because this is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't matter. It's not the stupid percentage change. Yeah, exactly.
Shit, like 365 on a bar. Like I thought I was gonna get you. Like, that's my one lift.
Well, you'll get me right now. I only weigh, like, I was weighed in at like 82 something this morning after a refeed. So yeah, I mean, right now I can bench maybe 315 touch and go. So I'm not there right now at this tender shredded glute body weight. So
it's okay. it's fine. So you were checking. I think the biggest thing, the boxes that we want, if you're an advanced trainee and you're listening to this and you feel like you've been spinning your wheels, the boxes that we want you to check would be, hey, figure out how much you can eat. That's step one. Then you got to eat more, right?
Yes.
And you got to eat more, and that's going to suck because you're going to have appetite regulation. Eventually, you're just not going to want to do it. You're probably going to have to use some hyperpalatable food. You're probably going to have to go out to eat, stuff like that.
Yes.
It's going to happen. And then the number two thing, because this shit is hard to measure. Like ultrasounds, DEXAs, they all have variability. It's all tough. We're trying to pick up a pound in maybe if we're lucky, maybe a pound in a year, maybe a pound and a half in a year. And you're probably, a lot of the sensitivity of these devices don't have that. So your best proxy is going to be, are you getting stronger? Yes. And probably not even a 1 rep max setting, probably more in like a 5 to 8 rep max setting. Maybe.
Yeah. Or you have volume across sets. I think that's a great way to look at it, especially in isolated movements. That's one thing when you look at the relationship between strength and size. It tends to be stronger in trained individuals, and it tends to be stronger when you're looking at something that has a lower skill component. So yeah, absolutely, you want your bench, squat, rows, chins, deadlift to go up. But if you're, believe it or not, like if your preacher curl has gone up, across 4 sets, the total volume you can do, that's probably a good sign your biceps are bigger, because there's not a whole lot else that you can, there's no Ed Cohn 4-hour seminar on how to do a preacher curl. You know what I'm saying? There's definitely, there's probably some muscle mass gains if that occurred.
That's the biggest thing that's changed in me the last 2 years. So I was an Olympic lifter. Then I was just like, I'm just want to have fun. I'm just going to do stupid shit and beat myself in the ground. Well, not stupid, but just like a lot of circuit training.
Yeah,
a lot of
fun shit.
Well, first, I guess I was a CrossFitter. I'm an addict. I love shit like that. So, and I just love lifting. And and people have tried to calm that down my whole life. And I'm like, no, it's going to happen. And so this was the first, probably 2-year stretch where I've done, and I got pretty big just doing mostly compound lifts, squatting, cleaning, snatching, doing your prototypical weight room lifts. And this was the first 2-year block. I hired one of my buddies who's actually worked with you guys too, who has the highest FMI that I've ever seen. He's got 27 naturally. He's insane. Big dude. And so I was like, hey, I'm just going to train like a bodybuilder because it's the only thing left. So let's just do it. And immediately took my compound sets down to, I'm doing 2 sets of bench a week, maybe 3. And I'm doing so many flies, so many anterior delt exercises. And that made such a big difference because I've never even a leg press or a leg extension machine.
It's very novel for your body. Yeah.
I've never felt that level of that level of muscular tension on that system. Even we can argue whether metabolic stress is a good or bad thing, but you're not going to get the same level of metabolic stress in your quads that you get from a leg extension versus you're going to have to do a lot of sets of squats probably.
And just the total targeted tension, even if we don't accept metabolic stress as a factor, when you can effectively do a lot of accessory movements and you're not too tied to the classic weightlifting and powerlifting movements, man, I train very similarly. I do enough to maintain and improve my skill on the movements that I want to get stronger on. But right now, for example, I do 3 sets of competition bench per week, but I do 3 sets of pec deck. I do 3 sets of cable pullovers, which are pec as well. I do 3 sets of a hammer strength incline. I do 3 sets of a Smith decline. I do 3 sets of flat dumbbells, all in the same week. So of my 18 sets that I do for chest, only 25% of them, or less, a fifth of them, or less than a fifth, are 1/6 math. There we go. Are bench press, and it's similar I do safety bar squats as my kind of main squat pattern, but I have leg press, I have sissy squats, I have leg extensions, and it's the same for every single muscle group. And I've seen the best progress I've made from a bodybuilding perspective in the last 2 years from doing this style of training, along with that kind of 1% body weight gain on average almost per month for that 1.5 year period I was doing it. So I totally agree, man. That's kind of the game plan. If you want to be able to do that, you have to commit on all fronts and kind of wage this war on maximizing every hypertrophy variable. So I totally agree.
And that's the compliment I think between powerlifting and bodybuilding is because what we're trying to fight here is probably an injury or a sickness, because that's what's really going to knock people out, right? So if you can, and the perfect complement to a ton of competition lifts is to take them away, maintain them, do exactly what I think both of us are doing, save your joint stress, and then you can run an intensity block, and you're probably going to be stronger because you put on a bunch more muscle.
What are you talking? Oh, this sounds like some kind of weird word where you take your training, you break it up into periods, and you make them complementary. We should make a word up, like maybe, I don't know, like periodization or something. I think it's probably what I would call it. Ben, this has been a really awesome discussion, dude. And I think I'm really appreciative of the work you're doing. I love that, when you emailed me, I found out I'm not the only person who's trying to do a study on this, and it makes me think, well, dude, if some bro Cephas of mine in South America is doing this, and I'm doing this in New Zealand, there's got to be at least one other person. So I am hopeful for the future. So that it's not just these good speculative talks. I think we're going to have some good data moving forward.
I agree, man. I'm super pumped, and let's do this again in 2 years, and we might have a different story to tell, and hopefully we're both maybe 2 to 3 pounds more jacked.
That would be amazing if we can keep gaining a pound per year, man. By the time we're 85, we're going to be like, probably, hopefully alive, but also hopefully really jacked. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna be way more jacked than you. How old are you?
I'm 36.
Oh, dude, I got you, buddy. Yeah, you're good. You're 85. You're 85. I'm 82. I got a shot. Let's bench max.
You're gonna beat me at the Masters 8 IPF World Champs. I'll be the only 2 live people, and if you can actually bench the bar, you'll win. So.
All right, man. I appreciate you. Have a great day. And how can just tell people probably know how to find you, but if you were going to point people to one place, where would that one place be?
The one place would be 3dmusclejourney.com. That is the number 3, the letter D, musclejourney.com. It's a one-stop shop. You can find our blogs, our YouTube, our podcast. Those are all free. And then if you want to get really into the weeds, there's a link there to monthly applications in strength sport, where we reviewed that study I was talking about, and also my books, which are the guides on how to gain this muscle as an advanced lifter, the Muscle and Strength Pyramids. It's all there. You can find the links.
Those are. I've read those books. I have them. I look at them. I looked at them before we had this podcast. They are solid. I think, like, if there's so much there, like I always talk about like warp speed. So like if you're just getting into that field, if you read those 2 books, like it's almost like cheating. Like you just learn so much.
Cheat with me.
So I appreciate your time, man. You're going to be down here in March next year. For the event where you're going to speak for like 2 to 3 hours, and then it's going to be a lot like this. Probably people are going to present on certain topics, and we're going to have a discussion about it. And I think that's if we're trying to crowdsource this stuff, and then get more people involved and just have them fall in love with the process of science. That's the game, man. So appreciate you.
Hey, I appreciate you having me on. This has been a really pleasure, man. Thank you.
Pura vida, nos vemos pronto.
Sí.